Hello and welcome back to the Nutrition and Life podcast. My name is Lisa, I'm your host, and today I have the pleasure to speak with Amy Chambers. She's an executive coach, a leadership consultant, a speaker, and a wonderful author. She has written The Seven Virtues of Exceptional Leaders, and now her new book is The Six Habits of Powerful People, both of which have been #1 Amazon bestsellers. I'm so excited to speak with you, Amy. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It's wonderful to be here.
Well, normally the way that I start off the show is by simply having a little bit of an introduction into who you are. Of course, I want to hear all about your work and mindset techniques and how you help leaders and so on. But before we get into that, I would just love to hear about you and how you got to what you're doing today.
Well, okay, great. I'm from Buffalo, New York originally. I went to college at Notre Dame, ended up in California when I went to get my MBA at USC, spent 21 years in financial services. And at some point, I realized that we have one life and it goes fast. And my passion was really to coach people around their mindset and their habits and success, not necessarily to help people be financially successful with the right mortgage or the right investments. I'd really enjoyed doing that for 20 years, but my heart lay in how do we help people be happy and be their truest version of themselves. So I had been a COO at a credit union and I left at the end of 2021. It was really scary and everyone thought I was crazy. Why would you leave such a, secure and stable job with great pay to start completely over from scratch and go to zero income? But it's what I did. And yeah, I've been at it for about 3 years now and really enjoying it.
Oh, amazing. I mean, there's just something powerful about going all in into what you love. I too had a full-time employment before becoming a full-time nutrition coach. I was a New Zealand police officer, and just throughout the entire time, I mean, I learned a lot about myself and humanity in general, but throughout the entire time, my heart and my head were always with nutrition and training. And so then when I decided to go all in, it was just very scary, as you said, and lots of pushback from like parents and so on. But I think sometimes we need to go through that scary feeling as well. And there's something great coming out of that. So super cool. Thank you for sharing that with us and also just for, taking the leap and impacting so many people. And now my first question is, what inspired you to write The Seven Virtues of Exceptional Leaders, and now your second book, The Six Habits of Powerful People?
Very cool. By the way, before I answer that, I have to say the concept of going all in is amazing. I think Will Smith said it best when he said, don't have a plan B, it distracts from plan A. And so I love that you said that. I think sometimes we do things half-hearted and then we don't understand why it doesn't work out. You got to be completely 2 feet in. Otherwise, you often don't get to what you really want. And so I just love that you said that.
Yeah.
I wrote the first book. I was in leadership. And I wrote about this in the book. I had some really lousy leadership when I was younger. I talked about these examples in the books, but I once had food poisoning and was throwing up, every 20, 30 minutes. And I called my boss to tell her. And she said, I really need you to come into work because we're short-staffed today. And so you have to be here. And I went in and I was talking to clients and these really terrific clients of mine that I'd been working with for a year or two just couldn't believe that I was there. And they were very angry and said, you should not be here. Why are you here? Go home. And I explained that my boss had wanted me there. And they said, that's ridiculous. You would never have expected anyone to do that if you were the leader. And that really stuck with me for a couple of years afterwards. I realized they were right. And I thought, why didn't I have that courage to stand up for myself? But why didn't I also expect better in my boss and tell her no and look for a new boss and realize someone that wasn't going to value me as a person wasn't the right boss? And then a couple of years later, I was working at another commercial bank. My grandmother passed away. I wanted to go to the funeral. We were in the middle of a January jumpstart big push. Same thing. My boss encouraged me not to go to my grandmother's funeral, or if I did, said, I just need you back in the office on Monday. And by that time, I'd grown stronger and I had said, no, I'm going to be at the funeral and you're going to have to live with that. But it really made me take pause around leadership and how many leaders out there thought it was okay to say those sorts of things. And I began realizing lots of people were unhappy at work and disengaged at work, and they weren't doing their best work at work because they didn't have great leadership. And I got passionate and obsessive around what does leadership really mean. And at some point, I figured it out. I had these principles and this framework and these models, and I began leading people differently. And all these people had said, "Wow, you're the best boss I've ever had. You've changed not only my career, but my life. You have to write a leadership book." And so I felt like I really owed it to these teams that I had led. I made an outline and I brought the book to life. And I just want people to know that they deserve, if they don't have a leader that supports their personal lives, or they're not getting coached or feedback about how they can do better, and no one's investing in them and working with them on a development plan, that they should ultimately search for a better leader. There's great leaders out there, but there's a lot of poor leadership. And so the book really helps people lead their teams well, but it also, I think, helps employees recognize what leadership they should be getting. The second book is kind of the sequel to the first book. It's about how to lead yourself. It's, again, chock full with principles and habits around trusting ourselves and having a vision for our lives and believing in ourselves and having high standards and making sure we can achieve those, but really listening to ourselves and forgiving ourselves and accepting ourselves, so that we can be happy. And it was the same thing in my personal life. I noticed, wow, a lot of people have these big goals and dreams, but they don't work towards them because they don't think that they can or they should. And I want to help people develop courage and the understanding of what it takes to achieve their most wild dreams and also be happy. So yeah, I felt that I really owed the world these books because I want people to be successful and happy and powerful. And yeah, I'd learned a lot from my own experiences and wanted to share them. So
That's
yeah, that's how
wonderful.
the books came to life.
That's the best reason to get into such an endeavor, which I'm sure is not easy and comes with its ups and downs as well, just the process of writing a book. But I love that you have not just addressed leaders in, business setting or whatever, because some people or most people listening to this are not going to be in a leadership position, at least not in an official one. And like you said, we're all the leaders of our own lives. In fact, one of the first self-development books I read, I think it was in 2017, 2016, was The Leader Who Had No Title by Robin Sharma. I don't know if you're familiar with this book, but it honestly changed my life, my outlook onto life, and just like taking responsibility and exactly as you're saying, giving oneself courage. And for me, it had a lot to do with giving myself permission of you're allowed to be happy, you're worthy of everything you desire. It's not just for the few select people out there that are like the special unicorns that deserve to have the financial freedom and the love and the whatever. You too, just like everyone else in the world, is deserving. And I think we're not brought up, or most of us anyway, are not brought up that way. And so it's so important to have people like you. So could you tell us a little bit about those 6 habits or the 7 virtues, or maybe a combination of both for anyone listening here who is just kind of like, what do you actually mean with that? Or what are some things that I can implement in my life?
Yeah, I'll talk about the habits a little more based on everything you just said. Couldn't agree more. A lot of us are not brought up to believe that we're deserving of those things. I think we look at people that got it and we feel, oh, they must have been more fortunate than I did, or they had something I didn't, or they just knew the right people. And so it's possible for them, but it's not as possible for me. I think that's a limiting belief. I believe that you're right. Everybody can be happy. Anyone can do whatever they want. It has to start with their beliefs, and then their actions tend to align with their beliefs. So the habits is an acronym. The letters all stand for something, and I'll start with it's the third habit, and it's B in habits is for befriend your brain, and it talks a lot about how our subconscious mind can brainwash us. Two things that the subconscious does really well: it tries to protect us and it wants to keep us safe, and then it runs old programs. So whatever it is that we learned in childhood, we're very likely to keep carrying out. So if our parents taught us things as a kid, we don't usually question those unless something happens to make us consciously start to rethink. And so we live with these paradigms for decades, sometimes our whole lives. And really, befriending your brain is about recognizing if you can get your conscious mind and your subconscious mind to work together instead of fight each other, you can identify really what it is that you want to do and achieve it. But a lot of times we don't, out of fear, because we're afraid of feeling uncomfortable, we're afraid of failing, we're afraid of making mistakes. And so even though it's the third habit, based on what you said, there's a lot that really starts there, because if we can figure out what is the subconscious telling us, what are these beliefs that I'm living by, and we can start to dismantle them and say, maybe that's not true. What if I just chose to believe something else? A lot can kind of come from there. So that's one of the habits I care a lot about. The A, if I'm going backwards, it stands for action. I believe in this knowing doing gap. A lot of people can kind of say, oh, I know that if I wanted to lose weight, I should probably be eating better or maybe exercising more, but they don't always do anything about it. They just sort of talk about it. And so once you've identified what it is that you want to see, taking action is huge, and figuring out what are the actions I need to take. Let me write them down. Let me give them a place to live and breathe on my calendar. Let me schedule my time in advance. So when that invite for happy hour comes up, I can put it through this lens of maybe was I supposed to be doing something more important to help me become the person I want to be tomorrow? If so, I've got to say no, because I need to stay committed to the things I said mattered most. So those are kind of two of my more favorite habits, the A and the B, the action and the brain. But there's a lot in the book. I think there's, you mentioned something about ultimately us not believing in ourselves. I think listening to our voice is really important. So the book got into the company we keep. It's amazing how many of us have friends or family that tell us you can't do those things or sort of make us feel less than, and finding our own native tongue and saying, what do I think about that? And how do I learn to stand with myself and have courage to tell other people sometimes, hey, I'm, sorry that you're not excited about me trying this, but I'm going to anyway. I really want to. And living with the disappointment or how we might let people down, that gets in, there's a lot of that in the trust and treasure yourself habit, which is the T. And so everything you said, I really resonated with, and everything you talked about is in the book somewhere. But those are a few of my favorite principles.
Oh, that's awesome. And yeah, I mean, likewise, I can only reflect that back that what you're saying is resonating with me because, so for example, I do find it quite tricky, I have to say, sometimes differentiating between intuition and then at the same time pushing outside of the comfort zone because one feels, oh, I'm listening to my intuition that could be mistaken for I'm staying in the comfort zone. I'm doing what just feels good, as opposed to I'm pushing outside of the comfort zone and am I breaking my intuition there? So, I mean, I just what I often find with regards to food, people try something new, and then of course things get challenging and so on, and then they say, "Oh no, I'm gonna revert back to my previous habits or whatever because I feel better with that." And I think we have to be so careful to not mistake that I feel good with just our safety keeping us or our subconscious keeping us in the comfort zone in some aspects. And yeah, I have encountered numerous occasions where I was like, ah, is this my intuition trying to hold me back, or is this my comfort zone trying to hold me back? I find they're sometimes like quite difficult to dissect.
You've probably identified one of the biggest struggles, I think, for all of us. And there's a lot of different ways of wording it. One way is it's that short-term comfort and good feel versus that long-term sort of goal or end result. And those two things aren't always compatible. One of my favorite quotes is, if we do what is easy, our life will be hard. If we do what is hard, our life will be easy. And then there's also this concept of this, the pain of discipline is greater than the pain, or I'm sorry, the pain of regret is greater than the pain of discipline. And both are very difficult. Like it's tough to have the discipline to say, I'm going to make this decision in the short term that doesn't feel good. And it's the harder decision. I'm going to turn off the television. I'm not going to have the chocolate cake today. I'm going to say no to that fun event that I got invited to. That doesn't always feel good. But if we're doing it because we say, hey, my long-term health and fitness is important to me, and I promised I was going to study for school, which is going to get me the job I want, or I promised I was going to read, which I believe is going to develop my mind, or I ultimately am saying no to this kind of great dessert I want because at the end of the day, I've had enough to eat today. And I want to make sure I stay at the size where I can be active and I can play with my kids as I get older and their kids. And those things sometimes don't feel good in the moment, but we can make ourselves feel better about them by reminding ourselves, why am I doing this? Oh, yes, it's because I have this dream or this vision of the future that's more important to me. And so balancing those things can be very tough. I guess I'll quickly share. You asked about the virtues or the habits. The V in virtues, the first book, stands for vision. And I love when people have vision statements for their lives. They begin with that end in mind. They say, what's really important for me long term? Where do I want to end up? And once you have that, it's easier to say no in the moment because you connect yourself back to that bigger kind of why. Hey, my long-term health and fitness is important to me. Me getting this degree and buckling down and studying this weekend instead of going out with my friends is important to me. I'm working really hard to develop and get that promotion at work. And so I've got to say no to something and stay here longer and finish this project because that's important to me. And again, those things don't feel good in the moment, but if we can remind ourselves of our why, then it helps us through, I think, that tough moment. We say, it might not feel great today, but I'm doing something that's going to help me be the person I'm going to want to be tomorrow or for the rest of my life. And that probably is going to feel pretty great. But in the moment, that gets kind of tricky. And so I think that vision statement or that vision board really helps us through those difficult situations, which I've had a lot of, by the way. I smiled when you were talking about it because I'm like, oh, that's every day. We all have that. That's all of us go through that. So
I think
cool
that's
stuff.
a pretty good guideline, Amy, in the sense of thinking about like what my future self would want me to do now,
Yeah.
and just in general those quotes that you mentioned as well. And it's so true that most people don't ever achieve what they imagine their dream life is should be like because they never take the time to gain that clarity. It's like, oh, I want my life to be better. I want to be happier or whatever. But you don't even take 10 minutes, 15 minutes to sit down to get clear on what does that mean? Does happier mean you live by the beach, or does that just mean you're surrounded by nice people? Does that mean that you're 15 kilos lighter, or does that mean that you earn $1,000 more per month? Like people are just, oh, I want to be happier. Or like, okay, we need to get that clarity on there so that I think what I heard you say as well is that from determining the why and having a clear vision, we also get clear on our priorities and
Yes.
knowing those priorities, exactly like you're saying, makes decision making in the moment so much easier. So when someone is like, oh, Lisa, you want to go out for drinks at 9 p.m. And I'm like, well, no, actually, I've got a gym session tomorrow at 6 a.m. I want to be sharp for that. I mean, I don't even need to think about it. I can say, no, I'm sorry, we can catch up tomorrow for coffee in the afternoon or some, but it makes that decision making in the moment so much easier. So I'm totally aligned with that. And one thing I wanted to touch on in regards to the action piece, because I really love that. I think many people are mistaken that and think that the motivation has to come first and then they take action. They're always like, oh, I'm not motivated to go to the gym now. I'm not motivated to do that. But as I said to you before we started recording, I stalked you on Instagram a little bit and checked out your content. And one of the most recent things, or one of the things that stood out the most to me, was a post where you said a word you should never say again and you should scratch out of your vocabulary. And that was should. And you said we should replace it with something else, and maybe you can kind of go into detail about, like, first of all, why we shouldn't say should, and also what we should replace that with in our vocabulary.
I love it. Very cool. That's actually a really favorite concept of mine. It was a hard one to learn, but once I got it, it made a big difference. I used to spend a lot of time asking myself, should I do something? Should I go for that run today? Should I try to go up for this opportunity at work? Should I do that or not do that this weekend? I spent years thinking, should I write these books? Should I leave corporate America? Should I start my own business? And I talked myself out of so many things because I had anxiety and worry and fear and doubt and uncertainty about how it was all going to work out and will I be successful? I'm not sure. I don't know. And so I better not. Maybe I'll wait till next year. And so the should put a lot of doubt in my mind. I was stuck at this decision point of, do I even want to start down the path or not? And what I realized is once we commit to something and say, I've identified I want this, I am going to do this, I am absolutely going to register for that marathon, I am going to get that job I've wanted, I'm going to finish school, I'm going to have a healthy relationship. Once you just say that and decide that and put it out in the universe, then the questions you can then ask yourself become all about how.
Mm,
How will I do it? How will I make that happen? How will I be successful? And it's a weird thing. It goes back to our brain again. Once we start telling our brain that something is going to happen, we start finding ways to prove it true. And it's weird because our brains don't want to make liars out of us. So if we get committed to something and say, I'm going to make this work, and we aren't going to relent from that, we're not, whether we do or not isn't up for question anymore. We've decided it's happening. Our brains then get to work on the problem of like, well, what things do I actually need to do? And it's amazing how from that reference point, we find the answers. We will find a way through. And so yeah, I'm really happy that you saw that because I spent years saying, should I try skiing? I don't know. I might break a leg. I might injure myself. That just seems a little dangerous. Or hey, should I, run the marathon distance? I don't know. I could get injured. Maybe that's only for like really great runners. And the moment I just said, I'm going to book the ski trip and I'm going to go take the lesson and I'm going to book my first marathon, it all came together. I bought the gear. I got up for the trainings. You mentioned earlier about saying no to someone so you could go to your 6 a.m. training session. It creates necessity. Like once I've committed to doing something, I have to get up and be at that 6 a.m. training session because that's a part of making this work. And so you just don't make excuses for yourself anymore. One other word I don't like a lot is try. When people say, "Oh, I'll try to be there, I'll try to do that." Try is kind of like a noisy way of failing. If we say I will, we find ways to make it happen. And so hopefully that was kind of some of what you were looking to hear about. But yeah, that was a big change in my life when I started watching the language I was using and changing those words.
yeah, 100%. And I think we can, as coaches, we develop a little bit like ears for that when we talk to people and we hear language like that. And then with that, also self-limiting beliefs that everybody has, including myself. Of course, I mostly hear that when it comes to nutritional talk or so, and especially when it comes to the word try, I hear that so often. Like we're recording this at the time before Thanksgiving, so often people might say, I'll try to be good over Thanksgiving, or I'll try to limit. It's like leaving the door just a little bit open where you already have a foot in the door. So you're giving yourself a little bit of permission that it's okay. Or maybe you're even turning it into like a self-fulfilling prophecy as opposed to when you're saying like, I will, and then automatically the brain goes to how can I make that happen? And one of the things that just came to my mind as you were talking about this was the concept of first of all ownership and second of all resourcefulness, because I think one of the most I read a study, I don't know what that was about, but it was kind of like, what do people get hired for? What's the skill or the character trait that people should hire for and get hired for most of the time? And that is by far resourcefulness. So just simply trying to figure, or not just trying, figuring things out. So you're given a task, you might not have a single clue of what that is, and you're
Yeah.
figuring it out. And I think sometimes people mistake that for I need to do it all on my own. I can't get any support. That's not what I'm saying with this. You can hire a coach, you can read a book and to gain or help from knowledge from other people. But at the same time, yeah, just having that firm belief of no matter what, I'm going to figure it out. I absolutely love that concept. So I love the concept of scratching should and just being clear, not spending any time in limbo, because most of the time, if you have a great business idea, if you have the inkling of I need to leave that person, that relationship, it's no longer good for me. Of course, we don't want to make any rash decisions. You don't want to make that decision at 11 p.m. when you're tired and cranky and hungry or whatever. But if it's something that it is in your intuition, acting on it most of the time is going to be better than just spending years, months, whatever, thinking about, oh, should I could, maybe, and so on.
We could talk about this for hours. I love everything you've said. The ownership and responsibility piece, you've kind of alluded to that a couple of times. That is really, I think, what this comes down to. People that say, I'll try, I'll do my best at Thanksgiving, they're sort of saying, without saying it, it's not entirely up to me. Like, I may not have full control over it. And that's a story they're telling themselves. They absolutely have full control over it. And they're allowing that door open, exactly like you said, to give themselves the out of like, I'll try, but if I get a little tempted or I like allow, my willpower to fall to zero and I start having a drink and, Aunt Sally's there offering me more pie, like I may just kind of break down and give in. And I'm just going to allow myself in advance permission to do that. I am sort of setting myself up not to be successful because then afterwards I get to say, well, I never said I would. I just said I would try. And I did. I tried my best, but it just didn't quite pay off. And the reality is we can decide ahead of time. We can make commitments with ourselves and say, here's what I'm going to do. I'm only going to have one helping of everything, and I'm not going to go back for seconds. I'm going to have, 3 alcoholic beverages, and after that, I'm switching to water. If I allow myself dessert, it's going to be one item. So I'll have to pick between the cookies and the cake and the pie, and then that's it. Like we can decide ahead of time, this is what it's going to look like, and I'm staying true to that. And by the way, I think that that is an activity that helps us through these tough moments. Sometimes if I'm going out with friends and it's a birthday and it's a Saturday night, I'm more likely to kind of want to deviate from the salads and the greens and the fish and the chicken and go for the burger and the fried food appetizer. And one thing that helps me is if I make the decision ahead of time. So if I say, I'm going to go look up the menu of the place I know we're going, and before I even get there, I'm going to figure out what I'm having because I know I'm going to have less willpower in the moment when everyone's there ordering whatever they want. If I've already said, hey, I liked that salad and I'm going to have that particular item because I believe that's the right decision, I'm less likely to be weakened in the moment. And these are things that help us take ownership and responsibility. It's I've made a decision ahead of time. I've said what it is. I'm committed to it. When the moment comes and the emotion or the intensity of that moment is there, it's easier for us to say, this was what I said I would do, and I need to stay true to that, especially if I'm a person that I make my commitments, I keep my word, I'm accountable. But yeah, that responsibility and ownership thing is tough. So often we blame circumstances or those around us for our problems. And at the end of the day, we have the ability to choose in these situations. And so I do think it becomes easier to say, I will, and I'm going to find a way. And no matter what it is, even if I don't know, I'll get the support and the resources I need to help me. I just need to think about it for a little longer. But the answers are here. Someone that believes those things and says those things, they almost always find a way to be successful. And those of us that kind of sit, like, leave it to chance, I think we struggle a lot more because we actually believe we don't have the power, but we do. We really do. We just don't know that we do. So I'm so happy you said all that. That all of this is really near and dear to my heart.
Well, Amy, if your career as a coach ever fails, which I don't think it will, I'm going to hire you because all those principles in regards to how to approach the holidays when it comes to food, that's like 100%. I mean, even just having a rough plan. I think sometimes when people think planning, that means I need to know I'm eating 150 grams of turkey and 2.5 tablespoons of this. No, no, no. That's again, we're taking it way
Yeah.
too far. Just having a rough outline and also speaking to yourself exactly like you did, like a child, where you're like, okay, you can have one of these desserts, but not all of them. I mean, that's what a responsible mom would probably also say to the child if the child's like, Mom, I want it all. But yet, talking to us in that manner, or maybe stopping after a couple of drinks and so on, some really wonderful strategies. And also, as you're saying, often we tend to blame other people or the environment, and you touched on environment earlier also, and I think that yes, studies clearly show that if we have a healthier, quote unquote, an environment, whatever that means, it is easier, a little bit easier to do those healthy habits. Or if we want to change or create a new habit, surrounding ourselves with people that have that habit already, that is very, very helpful. But I think nonetheless, even if you are that first person, or you feel like the first person in your environment that's taking those steps, and thankfully nowadays virtually we can kind of create a little bit of an environment like that, like the things that we watch in our social media, the things that we're listening to, joining a virtual running whatever group, something where you discuss your approach to running, like all these things, they might seem small, but I think they really, really help kind of at least create that environment a tad, and then often I think we'd be surprised that the people in our actual physical environment, they sort of follow along. It might take them a year or two or five or maybe never, but they might admire what you're doing and say, I might not run the marathon with you, but I'll stand there at the finish line and I'll make sure you get up every morning to go for your training or so. So sometimes we
Yeah.
don't dare to voice that we want their support or what we're doing now.
You've nailed it again. The environment, I think a lot of people view that as very reactively, like I'm in this environment, and so it's really tough for me. We can have so much say in our environment, and we can choose to create environments that are supportive of our goals. And a lot of us just sort of forget that. I will tell you that the environment here at this house, just because we've kind of talked about food and nutrition, it's a very healthy environment. And those decisions don't get made on a daily basis. They get made on a weekly basis when we're at the grocery store. So we don't bring the chips and the cookies and the sweets and the soda into the house. It's all leafy greens and vegetables. And there are moments that sometimes I'm kind of thinking, gosh, I wish I could just eat sort of like a snack that's like bad for me. It doesn't exist. I would have to actually leave the house and go to the store and buy it in that moment. And it's just not worth it. And so the environment here is, pretty much it's a nutritious one. And so if we're at home, the environment's good. I do know that being in the environment I described before, kind of with friends, and we're celebrating something and it's a night out, and I can't count on everyone else to just eat healthy in front of me. So I just say I have to limit the amount of times I put myself in that environment per week. And so usually I won't go out with friends for meals more than twice or at most like 3 times a week, because I just say I know that's a harder environment. And I don't believe that I have to be perfect. And so I do allow myself the moments of, hey, it's Saturday night and I'm not looking at the menu ahead of time. That is my night where I'm going to go there and decide in the moment and get whatever the heck I want. And I've earned that because I've been really great all week and I'm going to really enjoy it. But I can't have that happen every night. And so I get to kind of say, I'm living a life of balance and moderation. And so where do the moments where I want to have some fun and just do whatever I want go? But the number of times I'll have that has to be balanced with these other times that I set up an environment that was going to be supportive and kind and good for my goals. And so when we do that ahead of time, we kind of do that. You sort of talked about strategy or clarity earlier. When we plan those things in advance and get clear on, okay, how many times will I allow myself that? What does kind of balance and moderation look like? We can set up environments. Final thought on this: I would not have the motivation to run every day or most days if I hadn't created an environment that's supportive of that. I'm on Strava, I'm on Nike, I've joined a couple of run clubs. When I engage in those online and in-person communities, I'm in an environment of other motivated runners, and they're going to Ironmans and triathlons, and they're running 50-mile races. And I'm around people that are doing much more than I am. And, a lot of people say, oh, wow, you do so much. But I'm thinking, I know, 30, 40 people that are much more intense than I am. And they go to every world major. But I put myself in that environment on purpose years ago because I believed that these people would pull me up. And that's exactly what has happened. And so I make a choice not to skip those things because I know being in that environment is good for me. I used to be in an environment of people that went out a lot and kind of partied. And at some point I realized that's not really helping me. And so I had to say goodbye to some of those connections and relationships and kind of find a new environment. And that's a hard thing to do. But again, we have choices in that. We can take responsibility for our environment. And I wish more people knew that. It's a big change when we do.
Yeah, and it really can be hard, or it can feel hard, and especially if the people that you feel are holding you back are very close
Yeah.
family or something like that. But nonetheless, I mean, we can create a healthy amount of distance, or again, going back to the point of communication as well. I think just saying like, hey, I want to take better care of my health. I don't need you to be super supportive, but at least try not to like make it even harder for me. I think that that's already something to ask for. But speaking of habit creation, something else that I saw on your Instagram as well was a wonderful quote. I don't think it was from your book. I think it was something you mentioned from a different book, and that was take the stairs. And that whole concept of yeah, taking the stairs, and how anything new that we're doing is going to feel hard at first. But maybe you can explain why that quote spoke to you and what you meant by that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So Rory Vaden wrote that book. It's a great book. I just finished reading it, even though it came out over 10 years ago. And I can't, shameless plug, I love the book, think everyone should read the book. It mirrors the Six Habits perfectly. There were so many moments I was dog-earing pages and thinking, oh my God, this is exactly what I said in my book. And so it was fun to read Rory's book and see that it had come out so many years prior, and I hadn't even touched it. But there was an incredible amount of overlap. So I think the two books go really well together, for sure. Ultimately, and I wrote about this in the first book. This was under the R in Virtues, routine regimen. We get better at things when we practice them. It isn't we were born with it, we have it or we don't. Oh, it's just easy for her because she's kind of gifted. No, things get easier when we just invest in them. And so, whenever we're starting something new, and you mentioned the word hard, it is hard, and life is hard, but we can do hard things, but it's always hardest at the beginning. And again, it's that brain fighting us because we're trying to teach it a new program, and that feels awkward and unusual to us. We are creatures of habit. And so if we're not used to getting up at a certain time or driving to a certain place or just, yeah, making the time to read or clean, or we're trying to maybe go to a new networking group, it's always frightening, scary, uncomfortable, awkward because we're putting our system and our body through something that is new to us. There's new stimuli coming in. We're actually having to think about it. We just don't feel like we're in our comfort zone. And with each time we repeat that activity, it becomes easier and easier because slowly but surely the things that were new to us aren't new anymore. It's like, well, where am I going to park when I go? Or where do I sit when I get to that networking group? Or who am I going to talk to? Or what's it going to be like? We start knowing the answers to those questions. And so with each time we repeat the activity, we press the alarm, we go to the new gym, we go to the new group, it gets a little easier. And so what I think happens is that we don't like when things are hard. That subconscious mind tends to fire up a warning sign of like, if it's hard, it's probably not for you. And that's just incorrect information. But a lot of us get, kind of swept into believing it. If we can just make it through that initial phase, and depending on what the activity is, that might be a day or a month or a year. But if we can just stick with it long enough and trust that it's going to get easier, and at some point this flywheel effect is going to be running and we're going to have momentum and get to the other side of it, that's when we're not only will it get easier, but that's where we start seeing results too. And so if I could just give anyone a message or a pep talk, it's like you have to stick with it long enough to say it is getting easier and I am starting to see some results. But if it's still hard and if you're not seeing results, that's potentially a sign of you haven't been at it long enough. So it like the reverse message our brain send us is actually true. It's like, no, this is the time to stay with it longer and double down on it more, assuming you really believe it is the right activity, and not the time to go running for the hills just because it was hard. And that's been true of so many things. I think about I couldn't run a mile when I started, and now I love the half and full marathon distance. And I just, for the first few months, I'm like, this is never going to get easier. It's just so hard. I can't make it through 4 minutes of running without having to walk. But at some point it did. And when it gets easier, that's when we kind of start falling in love with it. And then it feels weird not to do it. And it feels bad not to go. And so we have to stay there long enough to let that change and that shift happen for us. And it takes some faith. It takes faith to believe that, hey, it's coming. I just can't see it and feel it yet. But I have trust that if I stay with it long enough, it will get easier. And then I'm going to start enjoying it. And then that's where it gets really fun. So I love that you pulled that out. I think that was a great takeaway from Rory's book. And those concepts show up in my books as well.
Well, I mean, first of all, super inspiring with your running journey. I'm excited for you that you're loving it now, and I can t also tell that it's part of who you are now, and not just looking at your wall, obviously, which is as we talked about, full with bits and stuff like that. But I'm sure that that was a big part as well. That eventually you started referring to yourself as I'm a runner. I'm part of the run group. I run. That is just who you are. And I think that's another
Yeah.
really important thing to go through when we are, first of all, as this is kind of like a nice circle because you said we have clarity, we take the action, and then we become that person. But if we can almost like shortcut, not necessarily shortcut, but even in the beginning when we're like, okay, how would that person that we're trying to become show up today? We can almost jump ahead and be like, the person that I'm trying to become likes doing this. The person that I'm trying to become goes to bed at 10 p.m., the person I'm trying to become. So like keeping that at the forefront of the mind, I believe that that can be very helpful. I don't know if you used visualization when you first got into running.
I sure did. And actually, this is one of my favorite stories. I talked about this recently on a Transformation Tuesday video. So, Robert Bannister was the first person in history to run a sub 4 minute mile. We talk about 5 minute miles really fast. That's still definitely elite status. But Roger Bannister in 1954, he was the first person to run a sub 4 minute mile. At that time, everyone said, it can't be done. You will die. It is physically impossible. You will collapse. You just don't have enough oxygen to run that fast as a human. And Roger Bannister just said, no, I don't believe that. I'm going to go for it. And when he finally did it, and by the way, I think this is a really cool story. No one had ever done it in history. In the few years after he did it, 39 more people were able to do it. And so once it was shown that it can be done, it's not impossible. It goes back to that belief in self-fulfilling prophecies. All these other people that had been right on the verge of it, running 402, 403, 405, they all got under. It just took him to prove it can be done. I've done it. But when he got asked, since he was the first person that done it, how did you do that? I just loved what he said right off the bat. He said, in my mind, before I had done it, I visualized that I already had done it. I saw that I had done it. And he talked about, he visualized it in many ways, but he thought about the feeling of it, the emotion, like what will it feel like to have done it? And then he thought about sort of like the sound of it, like what will I hear, what will people say to me, what will I say to myself? So there was like the sound of it. He used all of his senses and ultimately said, I got so clear on that vision, it was like it had already taken place. And I think that visualization is really important. And when you talk about the becoming, it's like, if I were to be the kind of person that does X, what would that feel like? What would that look like? What would that sound like? Like what sort of things would be taking place in my life? If you can get as clear as possible on that, it really, I think, pulls us through those tough, painful moments of like, I don't want to. I think it's why people put photos on their refrigerator of supermodels. It's a visualization technique. It's like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to look like that. And when I look like that, I would feel good in a bathing suit and I'd be happy on my vacation and people would give me compliments. And so really not taking that for granted, whether it's writing it out or seeing it over and over in your mind, I think it helps pull us through the impossible. And so, yeah, visualization, huge thing. I think that's why people create vision boards. It's a visual reminder of like, where am I going towards? But the becoming is where life gets really fun because then that is where all of the thought and like, oh, I don't want to go, but you should go, but I don't want to, but you should. A lot of that goes away because it's like, it's just what we do. It's part of who we are at this point. It'd be weird if I didn't. And so, yeah, I think that it takes all these steps to get to the becoming, but then once you become it, after that, life gets kind of sweet. So, but anyway, that's one of my favorite stories around visualization was that Roger used that process to do this incredible thing that still is talked about in American history as far as the running world goes. So, yeah, I
I
definitely use
actually
it all the time.
I actually got goosebumps as you were telling the story, and then more importantly, that another 30 people or whatever in the same year broke the record again. Like that is just to show like the limitation that we sometimes place on things through our mind. So thank you for sharing that story with us, and just in general, I want to make sure I'm respecting your time, Amy, but you're sharing such wonderful concepts with us. I will most certainly link all your details and your books in the show notes. But maybe you have one last recommendation or takeaway for people that you wish they implement going forward if they want to be the leaders of their own life.
Yeah, I will. I will tell you that for my clients, one of the things that makes a huge difference with everything we've talked about today is blocking out about 2 hours a week. If that's all you can spare, that's enough time. If you can find more, that's great. But to strategize around this stuff. And I think sometimes people say, I don't really have 2 hours. Everyone really does have 2 hours. It's not a great percentage of our week. And usually they can take it from somewhere, whether it's scrolling on Instagram or watching television or just, I don't know, doing something that's probably not really a return on investment activity. It's fun, but it's not actually helping them with the becoming. But if you take 2 hours a week, whether it's on Sunday night or Monday morning, and you just kind of close the laptop, turn off the phone, and you work with this stuff. Like, what are the most important things I can do this week to become the person I said I wanted to be tomorrow? Or who is it that I really want to be tomorrow? You work with that clarity that you talked about. That step alone, just 2 hours of private, quiet strategy time with no social media, no internet, and no outside world, thinking about like those actions, the beliefs, what is my subconscious telling me? What's going on for me that I'm not aware of? And then dealing with that. Like, how do I want to, what could I do differently about that? That's a huge, simple step that helps people start to transform their lives. And so if I was to give anyone advice, it would be to invest 2 hours a week in that strategy time. I think that's where the magic really starts to happen, is when we choose to take that private time. So that would be the thought. And I guess final thought, a quote, life is 10% what happens to us, and it's 90% how we respond to it. And I hope people know that they have a lot of choices in how they respond. They can't control sometimes what's coming in, but they can always control how they respond and answer that. So I think we have a lot more power and choices than we realize. So that would be what I would leave you with today.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Amy.